As is always the case in Lexington, we begin with history. And we begin our storytelling with the biggest, fattest lie in Lexington history. Here to give us a little more of that background, will you please welcome the publisher of the Colonial Times, Jim Shaw.
Good evening, everybody. I think the biggest, fattest lie so far was when David Rose convinced me to go first, because I have to follow that incredible singing from Elizabeth and Marlon's incredible performance. So I'm going to change my performance, and I'm no longer going to do this. I'm going to quote Fred Flintstone, and I'm going to jump from above here into a little cup of water right here. So, at any rate, no, here to talk about. This gentleman right here, this is when people think about Lexington and our unique place in history, they think of our place as the birthplace of American liberty here and the birthplace of American liberty in our nation, the home of the shot heard around the world. I know there may be some Concordians here that may disagree with that, but I'll fight it to the death. What most people don't know is that Lexington also served as home for the country's most notorious swindler, and that's Charles Ponzi. Ponzi, let me just pull this a little closer. Here in Lexington, the name Ponzi holds a different connotation. It's neighbor. You see, the world's most notorious swindler, Charles Ponzi, lived right here in Lexington in a beautiful estate on Slocum Road. At the height of his most infamous criminal enterprise, Ponzi called Lexington his home. Ponzi first arrived in Boston by ship in 1903. He claimed to have only $2.50 when he first arrived, with no real luck securing gainful employment. Ponzi soon moved to Montreal, Quebec, where he found work as an assistant teller at the newly opened Banco Zerosi. At the time, the bank was paying 6% interest on deposits, which was twice the average rate at the time. And soon, however, the banks, this created a huge influx of depositors, new depositors into the bank. And soon, however, the bank's real estate investments began to collapse, causing economic chaos. And in the effort to prevent a mass exodus of depositors, they began paying the interest with money from new depositors. And Ponzi took note of this, and the seed was planted. When the number of new depositors drastically declined and they could no longer meet their obligations to existing depositors, the bank was shuttered and its owner fled to Mexico with much of the bank's remaining cash. Once again, penniless and unemployed, Ponzi went to visit one of the bank's former clients. Finding no one there, Ponzi helped himself to the company's checkbook and forged a check for over $400. He was caught and convicted and spent 3 years in a Quebec prison. Ponzi returned to the U.S. and quickly got caught up in an effort to bring illegal Italian immigrants into the country. He was convicted and spent 2 years in an Atlanta, Georgia prison. After his release, Ponzi made his way back to Boston, where he met and married Rose Greco. Ponzi made a lame attempt at honest employment, but his greed and the promise of great riches lured him towards what many consider to be the crime of the century. One day, while opening his mail, Ponzi happened across an international reply coupon. Right there. And these coupons were intended to be sent overseas for the purpose of return postage, but Ponzi soon realized that there was a value differential. For instance, with the Italian post-war economy in major decline, the cost of postage in Italy had decreased. So theoretically, someone could buy these international reply coupons in Italy and then send them to the U.S. where they could be sold for a higher value. Ponzi went to work and soon bragged that after all of his costs, he was realizing a profit of 400%. Ponzi decided to bring in investors and promised them 50% return within 6 months. This is one of the promissory notes that he signed promising a 50% return on a $200 investment in 6 months. His scheme immediately attracted hundreds of eager investors, blindly handing over tens of thousands of dollars. Overnight, Ponzi was a very wealthy man. Ponzi was now part of high society and required all of the trappings of his great wealth. He lavished expensive gifts upon his wife and friends and dined in the fanciest restaurants in Boston. The only thing left was a home appropriate to his stature. He settled on this beautiful estate on Slocum Road in Lexington. I'm not certain if Ponzi had the home built or it already existed, but the beautiful stucco mansion that was built in 1913 still stands today. In fact, it's owned by a Lexington native. For Ponzi, the home showcases need to flaunt his newfound success. Now, there are several accounts of just how much money Ponzi had amassed and how many investors fell victim to his scheme. One account says that Ponzi duped over 10,000 individuals for $9.5 million. Another account places the number of victims at 40,000 for over $15 million. A quick calculation at measuringworth.com indicates that $9.5 million in 1920 dollars could be worth anywhere from 142 million to upwards of 1.5 billion in spending power in today's market. Nearly as fast as his meteoric rise in wealth and influence came his precipitous downfall. Like any pyramid scheme, the basis of Ponzi's big idea, success only thrives as long as there are new investors to pay back original investors. And when the pool of new investors dried up, the jig was up for Ponzi. In a story printed in the Boston Post in July of 1920, Ponzi's character and business acumen was called into question. Most notably, early investors stuck with him because they had experienced tremendous profit. Ponzi was forced to hire a publicity person who eventually turned on him as well. The PR guy, William McMasters, quickly determined that Ponzi was a fraud and later stated that, quote, the man is a financial idiot. He can hardly add, he sits with his feet on the desk smoking expensive cigars in a diamond holder and talking complete gibberish about postal coupons. So that was the end of that relationship. Postal regulators soon raided Ponzi's Boston office and found to their amazement that Ponzi actually had very few of the postal coupons and had fueled the frenzy of his multi-million-dollar empire. It was all a complete fraud because Ponzi had used the U.S. Postal Service to communicate with his investors. He faced serious mail fraud charges, and in all, he was charged with 86 counts of federal mail fraud in 2 separate indictments. In return for a lighter sentence, Ponzi pled guilty to one of these charges and served 5 years in prison. After about 3 years, he was released to face state charges for swindling investors. While awaiting trial, Ponzi jumped bail and fled to Florida, where he was eventually captured and went on to serve 9 years in prison. This here is his, I'm sorry, let me back up. This is his mother and his wife and his mother in the middle, who he doted on greatly during this period of time. This is the headline, one of the headlines, because they were all over the country. And this here is where he's being deported back, or brought back to Boston. He jumped bail and fled to Florida, where he was eventually captured and went on to serve another 9 years. After his release, Ponzi was deported to Italy and eventually traveled to Brazil, where he died in 1949, penniless and alone. Wikipedia refers to Ponzi as one of the greatest swindlers in American history. I have little trouble with that because I associate the word great with something profound and profoundly positive, and this was anything but profoundly and positive on our society. I'm happy that Wikipedia allows people to edit its content because I think I'll go back and correct it so it more accurately reflects who Ponzi was, one of the most notorious swindlers in American history. Thank you.